Bill Bennett was the predecessor to T.H. Bell, and T.H. Bell would have been Secretary of Ed around the time that Charlotte Isby blew the whistle on Project Best. So it's a straight line from Project Best through all the Secretaries of Education to Betsy DeVos, and she's got her own ties in the corporate sector, in the technology sector as well.
Yeah, and also her brother runs Blackwater, and is accused of murder in a civil litigation. But also, but aside from that, Betsy DeVos also just recently proposed changes to Title IX, reporting and investigating, that would really damage the reporting. It hinders reporting of child abuse in schools. And also, too, it really damages trying to go back for lawsuits later on and try and get compensated for being abused as a child in school. This is all brand new. It's hardly been, I don't think it's been reported at all besides me. I heard about this through some conference calls with some attorneys, investigators who work these kind of cases. It's just right around. Have you heard about this?
No, I'm glad you brought it to my attention. I've been so focused on these I've been trying to write an article on these federal regulations while people can still comment on it. And no, if you can send me a link to that, I would really like to look into that. Yeah,
there's very little reporting on it, but the thing is she makes it more difficult to report and then more difficult to sue later on and collect against these schools. And those are big lawsuits. Now, somehow a new school world order is also focused on Skull and Bones.
Yeah, and the connection there is a couple different ways. So, I guess I should start with how do we know about Skull and Bones?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we know about Skull and Bones? If it's a secret society, how do we know about it? Well, we actually know about it because of Charlotte Iserbyt. And the funny thing is, I'm learning all this as I'm writing these articles. I'd heard about Skull and Bones. I'd heard about Charlotte. I had heard about Anthony Sutton or Chris Milligan, my publisher at the time, but the rest of it comes together as I'm writing it. So I'm pointing out the Hegelian dialectic. We've probably all heard, problem, reaction, solution thrown around. Maybe you've heard the term Hegelian dialectic, but it's always used when people talk about false flags and stuff like that. Right. The primary source documentation we have to verify that the activities of Skull and Bones come from Charlotte Iserbyt. She gave the Black Address books to Anthony Sutton. Anthony Sutton was a Hoover Institute fellow at Stanford University, also taught economics in California, one of the universities in California. I think it's California State, one of the state universities. And he wrote a book when he was at Hoover Institute called Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. It's actually 3 volumes. And the third volume, they basically didn't want him to publish because one of the things that he discovered was that the rise of the Soviet Union and from the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution through the Cold War was largely funded and even made possible by the West, by America and by Europe, by financiers who helped fund and invest in their infrastructure, railways, and other technologies, including military and stuff like that. And Sutton's whole analysis was, well, why, if we're at Cold War, if these people are our enemies, why are we building them up? Especially because his analysis demonstrated that not only were we just helping our enemies, but they probably wouldn't have been able to develop to the level of a formidable adversary had we not built them up. And it perplexed him, and he didn't really come to the conspiratorial conclusions that he eventually came to yet. But Hoover Institute basically said, don't publish it. And Chris says they said, don't break your rice bowl, Anthony. You got a good thing here. Go along to get along. Don't publish that part. Well, he went around him and published it. And as Chris Milligan, my publisher, says that basically ruined the guy's life. It was the path that he chose, and I'm sure he was honored to take it. But as far as career and his economic well-being and things like that, he said later on he got tired of going to conferences that had too many UFO guys and on one side, and then Birchers or whoever on the other side, and he wanted to be taken seriously as an academic, and that's one of the things I tried to do in my book. But he said it didn't make sense, and Charlotte Iserbyt one day gave him the black books because Charlotte's father and grandfather are both members of the Order of Skull and Bones, and she leaked the address books to Anthony. The thing I know about the address books is that they're not just there to Well, the fraternity itself we should understand it's a senior society at the college, all right? So it's not a fraternity like it's for bachelor or I'm sorry, freshman level, sophomore, etc. So in other words, it's not meant for you to network and fraternize with people on campus while you're there. You can only get into it when you're a senior, which means it's meant to fraternize and network with other families that you're going to network with after you graduate. Okay, these are a bunch of old money families like Vanderbilt, Cabots, the Whitneys, and then you have newer money families like the Rockefellers that later get into it. And so basically what that black book is meant for is so that when, after they graduate, you can keep the money consolidated, And so when you get these black books, the address books don't just say your name, they also say what industries are you in. So are you a lawyer? Do you hold, coal mines or something at one point? Are you in energy, biotech, okay, politics, all right? So, if you need to network through the channel of whether it be political society or corporate society, you have basically your buddies set up, and you can also consolidate your wealth. Okay, and so when Anthony looked at the names and he looked at their professions, what he also found was a bunch of the banks that were funding the Soviet Union, which you also discovered at another point funding Hitler, the Nazi regime, were owned by the common denominator in both was that they were owned by people from the Order of Skull and Bones, who often had token left-wing people and token right-wing people in there to basically play both sides of the political spectrum. And so basically Sutton shows that not only did they use the Hegelian dialectic to play both sides of the left-right paradigm politically to bring about greater global consolidation through World War, okay, through rise through Cold War conflict, by funding Hitler through things like it was Guarantee Trust, Union Banking Corporation, Ruskin Bank. These are the different institutions that where they funneled money to fund these organizations. Prescott Bush, this is old hat, is old news. Prescott Bush got charged with trading with the enemy for his work at Union Bank Corporation, funding Fritz Thyssen. It was linked to the Nazi regime, and so he showed that not only did they do that, but he wrote one of the first chapters of that book is called "How the Order Controls Education," and he told Charlotte several times he thought that was actually the most important thing he wrote. It's more important than how the order controls war and revolution, which goes through everything I just mentioned. But how the order controls education was key. So they tried to basically suppress his work on that. He did get it published, but they tried to put it out of print. And so it's my publisher, Chris Milligan, that basically rescued that from being, otherwise, I guess, censored. And so they also did their own work together on Fleshing Out Skull and Bones. They've also co-authored stuff together. So the specific ways that they impacted education would be, I guess, there's 5 ways. Right? And first is to bring in Hegelian philosophy, and it's not just the idea that truth, knowledge is in contradiction, but it's also this idea of collectivism. Like Hegel thought that he had this idea of, he literally said that the state is God marching on earth, and he also had this fetish with what we call the slave master dialectic. And so basically, this idea that truth is in contradiction would be that the slave and the master have this mutually beneficial relationship. Might not, if you ask the slave, he might tell you something different. But if you look at it collectively for the greater good of the state, which is God marching on earth, right? Everybody's playing their position, and it's all, it's all good. That was Hegel's idea of collectivism, and how these contradictions would basically evolve. That's Hegel's term. It's not Darwin's term. Darwin's building on Hegel, would evolve through these different contradictions. So that's the philosophy that they kind of replace our old classical view of individual rights and truth being non-contradictory and universally applied to everybody, right? The other aspects would be that they would take that philosophy and they would ram it through compulsory education, and the compulsory education system is set up by basically the Troika, which is Daniel Coy Gilman. These are all Bonesmen, Andrew Dixon White, and Timothy Dwight. And they set up some of the most important universities, such as Johns Hopkins University, Cornell University Cal Berkeley. The compulsory public education at the middle school, grammar school level would be set up by Alphonso Taft, a Skull and Bones member there, and he would help institute this, pushing people like Horace Mann at Antioch College. He was also a proponent. There would also be proponents of Hegelian philosophy. So when you set up the university system, compulsory education with the philosophy of Hegelianism, they then tie into that educational psychology, which is what we mentioned as far as the stimulus response method or operant conditioning method that is being used in the computers. This is largely set up by again, the help of Daniel Coy Gilman at first. So he basically appoints G. Stanley Hall to Johns Hopkins University to be the first chair of psychology. At that point, it was a discipline of philosophy, and it was Hall who was not only a Hegelian, but he was a student of Wilhelm Wundt. Now, Wilhelm Wundt was the founding father of laboratory psychology. He comes up with the stimulus response method of psychological conditioning. It later becomes what's known as classical conditioning. We know this by Pavlov's dog. So it works by association through stimulus and response. So a dog naturally responds to food, stimulus of food, response of salivation. If you associate another stimuli with it, you can elicit the same response to association. So if you ring the bell with the food, the dog will salivate in response to the bell through association. This later becomes refined through, if you've ever seen those they put bats in mazes and things like that. Stop. What is that all about? Well, this is where you take the associative principle of classical conditioning and you figure out not just one stimuli can you make them associated with another. Now, how can you organize that into patterns of behavior? So, the reward or the response is the cheese at hand. You're trying to figure out, can you get them to perform specific tasks? It becomes more complex. B.F. Skinner, who would be funded by Bonesman McGeorge Bundy at Harvard University, funded his teaching machines, which were these analog devices that were comparable to the adaptive learning software now. So B.F. Skinner takes this thing, operant conditioning, he just put 4 quadrants to the behavior stuff. So you have punishment and reward. Okay, and then you have positive punishment, negative punishment, positive reward. And so it just means one is adding the stimulus, one is removing it, and one is for a positive effect or reward effect in the punishment effect. But he puts that into these analog boxes, basically. Remember the Viewmasters, like the Disney thing?
Yeah.
You had those wheels. Yeah, it's like that. Instead of having the pictures on the wheels, they'd be on a tape on a reel, and you have question answer on the tape, and then you'd answer the question, and it could only go one way. So once you answer, you can't go back. And then it would give you your score at the end. And actually, some of them were designed to give you pieces of chocolate and stuff if you did good. So you got the reward, punishment in there. And McGeorge Bundy, Bonesman Bundy funded that. And basically now the adaptive learning software is just convert the wheels, the gears, and the tape roll to the digital windows, and click on your mouse, and then the typing, and that's the same exact thing. But now they can actually automate it with artificial intelligence, and this is where Steve Mnuchin comes in, because he has been influential in helping to write the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was the big tax cut that they just did not too long ago. Some people call it the Tax Cuts and Robots Act because there's something called the Full and Immediate Expensing Clause, which basically works like this. You have, if you buy new equipment for your company, you can write off appreciation over time, but there's a clause in there where if you buy new equipment now for a limited period, you can write off full depreciation the first year, which means that if you can purchase something to automate whatever percent of your workforce, and especially let's say you bought it at the end of the tax year, you could write it off, a month or two later, and basically instead of paying all of that money and more in labor, you could replace all those workers and the labor and the benefits, and you can automate it for a penny